Let us begin with a number that frames this entire discussion. In 2023, the United States imported more than $427 billion worth of goods from China. At the same time, it exported just over $147 billion worth of goods to China. This staggering imbalance, a trade deficit of approximately $280 billion, is not merely a line item on a national ledger. It is the central, animating grievance that has fueled one of the most significant geopolitical conflicts of the 21st century. This figure represents millions of American jobs, the hollowing out of industrial towns, and a complex web of economic dependency that has become a source of immense strategic vulnerability for Washington. This is not a simple story of one country buying more than it sells. It is a story about the very structure of the global economy and the shifting plates of international power. For decades, the world operated on a consensus built around free trade, with the belief that economic integration would lead to political moderation and shared prosperity. China's entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001 was seen as the high watermark of this era. Today, that consensus has shattered. The U.S. China trade relationship, once hailed as a model of globalization, is now viewed through a lens of intense rivalry and national security, a battlefield where economic tools are wielded as weapons. The sheer volume of this trade relationship means that any disruption sends shockwaves across the globe. Think of the journey of a single smartphone. Its components are sourced from multiple countries, assembled in a Chinese factory, shipped across the Pacific and sold in an American store. This intricate supply chain, multiplied by thousands of different products, has created a level of interdependence that is historically unprecedented. When tariffs are imposed or technology is restricted, it is not just two governments that are affected, it is every business and every consumer caught in this vast interconnected network. The conflict, therefore, is not contained to Washington and Beijing. Its fallout lands on everyone. Understanding this context is crucial to grasping the gravity of the current situation. The trade deficit is more than an economic statistic, it is a symbol. To many in America, it represents a loss of manufacturing prowess and a sense of being outmaneuvered on the global stage. For China, its manufacturing dominance is a source of national pride and a key driver of its economic miracle. These deeply held national narratives are now clashing, turning what could be a technical trade dispute into a profound struggle over power, influence, and the future direction of the world order. It is a conflict that is as much about psychology and national identity as it is about economics. The latest escalation in this long-simmering conflict revolves around a series of actions taken by the Trump administration, even as he campaigns for a potential second term. While the Biden administration has maintained many of the Trump-era tariffs, the rhetoric from the former president signals a potential for a much more aggressive second chapter. Donald Trump has recently floated the idea of imposing a tariff of 60% or more on all Chinese imports. This is not a minor adjustment. It represents a fundamental threat to the remaining vestiges of the U.S. China trade relationship. Such a move would be a dramatic escalation from the targeted tariffs of his first term, which averaged around 19% on affected goods. Why does this matter so profoundly? Because it signals a move away from targeted pressure to an all-out economic siege. The initial tariffs were ostensibly designed to punish specific unfair trade practices such as intellectual property theft and forced technology transfers. A blanket 60% tariff, however, is a blunt instrument intended to force a complete decoupling of the two largest economies in the world. The implications would be immediate and far-reaching, potentially triggering a global recession. It would force American companies to completely reconfigure their supply chains overnight, a process that is both costly and time-consuming, and would pass on massive price increases to American consumers on nearly everything they buy. This aggressive posture has sent a chill through global markets and has put allies on high alert. International trade is not a zero-sum game played between two countries, it is a complex ecosystem. A move this drastic would disrupt shipping, logistics and manufacturing not just in the US and China, but in countries like Vietnam, Mexico and Germany that are deeply integrated into these supply chains. Allies in Europe and Asia, already struggling with their own economic challenges, would be caught in the crossfire. The move would likely be met with swift and severe retaliation from Beijing, further destabilizing a global economy already fragile from inflation and geopolitical uncertainty. The global impact, therefore, extends far beyond simple economics. It touches upon the core of the international order. A full-blown trade war of this magnitude would force other nations to choose sides, potentially fracturing the world into competing economic blocs. It would undermine international institutions like the World Trade Organization, which, for all its flaws, provides a forum for resolving disputes through rules rather than raw power. This latest threat from Trump is a clear indication that, for some, the era of integrated globalization is over, and the era of great power competition is now the defining reality of our time. The world is watching and waiting to see if these words become policy. The conflict is built on three central pillars of American complaint, each one a source of deep and persistent friction. The first is tariffs. While the U.S. has imposed significant tariffs on Chinese goods, a core American argument is that the playing field was never level to begin with. U.S. officials have long pointed to China's use of non-tariff barriers, state subsidies, and other protectionist measures that effectively shield its domestic market from foreign competition. Chinese companies benefiting from state support are able to sell their goods abroad at lower prices, while American firms face a gauntlet of regulatory hurdles to sell their products in China. This perceived lack of reciprocity is a foundational grievance that fuels the American desire for corrective action. The second pillar, and perhaps the most visible one, is the massive trade deficit we discussed earlier. For decades, the U.S. has bought far more from China than it has sold. Critics of this arrangement, including former President Trump, argue that this is not a natural outcome of free market dynamics. They see it as evidence of a calculated strategy by China to devalue its currency and pursue export-led growth at the expense of American manufacturing. The visual of shuttered factories in the American Midwest, contrasted with the gleaming new cities of coastal China, provides a potent political narrative. This deficit has become the scoreboard by which many Americans judge the success or failure of the economic relationship. The third and most strategically significant pillar is technology. This is where the trade dispute bleeds into a national security crisis. Washington accuses Beijing of engaging in a systematic campaign of industrial espionage and forced technology transfer. The allegation is that American companies wishing to do business in China are often compelled to enter into joint ventures, a process through which their Chinese partners gain access to valuable intellectual property. Furthermore, U.S. intelligence agencies have warned of state-sponsored cyber attacks targeting American corporations to steal trade secrets and proprietary technology. This is not just about losing a commercial edge. It is about a rival power allegedly stealing the innovations that will define the 21st century, from artificial intelligence to biotechnology. These three pillars, tariffs, deficits, and technology, form the bedrock of the U.S. case against China's economic practices. They represent a comprehensive challenge that goes far beyond simple trade imbalances. It is a challenge to the principles of fair play, a perceived threat to American economic sovereignty, and a serious concern for national security. When Donald Trump first initiated the trade war, he was tapping into a deep well of bipartisan frustration that had been building for years. The methods may be controversial, but the underlying problems they seek to address are seen as very real by a large segment of the American political establishment and the public. The current standoff did not emerge from a vacuum. It's really the culmination of years of escalating rhetoric and retaliatory actions. Donald Trump, long before he became president, was a vocal critic of China's trade practices. Honestly, as far back as the 1980s, he was railing against foreign competitors, and by the 2000s, he had firmly set his sights on China. During his 2016 campaign, he made promises to get tough on China, a centerpiece of his platform, famously accusing Beijing of the rape of our country. This was not the nuanced language of diplomacy, it was the raw language of economic nationalism, and it resonated with millions of voters who felt left behind by globalization. Upon taking office, President Trump moved to translate this rhetoric into policy. In 2018, his administration began imposing tariffs on a wide range of Chinese goods, starting with steel and aluminum and quickly expanding to cover tens of thousands of other products. The stated goal was to pressure China into changing its ways. The administration presented Beijing with a list of demands, including calls for China to reduce the trade deficit, stop forcing technology transfers, and protect American intellectual property rights. This marked the formal beginning of the trade war, a dramatic departure from the policies of engagement pursued by previous administrations of both parties for nearly 4 decades. China's reaction was swift and, honestly, pretty predictable. Beijing denied the American accusations, framing them as baseless protectionism and a violation of international trade norms. It responded with its own retaliatory tariffs, carefully targeting American agricultural products like soybeans and pork. This was a politically astute move, designed to inflict maximum pain on the rural and agricultural communities that formed a key part of Trump's political base. The result was a tit-for-tat cycle of escalation. Each time the U.S. announced a new round of tariffs, China would counter with its own, and the list of affected goods on both sides grew longer and longer, disrupting industries and creating uncertainty for businesses around the world. This cycle of action and reaction really defined the first Trump term. Negotiations were held, but they were often fraught with tension and yielded little in the way of a comprehensive breakthrough, save for a Phase 1 deal that was only partially fulfilled. The core issues remained unresolved. The conflict expanded beyond trade, with the U.S. taking action against Chinese technology firms like Huawei, citing national security risks. This history is essential to understanding the present moment. The distrust is now deeply entrenched on both sides. The mechanisms for dialogue have been weakened. The stage has been set for an even more confrontational chapter, should the political winds in Washington shift once more. One of the more recent and honestly pretty notable developments in this ongoing saga has been a subtle but significant shift in tactics. While campaigning, Donald Trump continues to use maximalist rhetoric, but his administration's past actions offer a glimpse into a more complex strategy. Consider the suspension of certain tariffs during his term. On several occasions, the Trump administration announced temporary exclusions for hundreds of goods imported from China, responding to pressure from American businesses who argued they just couldn't find alternative suppliers. This suggests an awareness, even within a hawkish administration, that complete economic decoupling is easier said than done and frankly carries significant domestic costs. These tariff suspensions and exclusions create a fascinating dynamic. On one hand, they reveal the practical limits of a trade war. The American economy is so deeply intertwined with China's that severing the connection without causing severe self-inflicted harm is nearly impossible. American manufacturers rely on Chinese components, and consumers have grown accustomed to the low prices that Chinese imports make possible. On the other hand, these pauses can also be used as a strategic lever. By granting temporary relief, the administration can reward or punish specific industries and maintain a degree of control over the economic pain being inflicted both at home and abroad. The most potent actions, however, have been in the technology sphere. The decision to place Chinese tech giants like Huawei on the Entity List was a move with profound consequences. This action effectively banned American companies from selling critical software and semiconductors to Huawei, crippling its smartphone business and hindering its global 5G ambitions. This was a clear signal that the U.S. views the tech race with China as a zero-sum game. The goal is not just to achieve a level playing field, but to actively slow China's technological advancement in critical areas that have military and intelligence applications, a strategy the Biden administration has largely continued and even expanded upon. What does this all mean for the global economy and international politics? It means that the conflict is evolving. It is no longer just about trade deficits, it is a full-spectrum competition over the commanding heights of the 21st century economy. The use of tech bans and sanctions as a tool of statecraft has become normalized. This forces other countries into a difficult position. Do they align with the American technology ecosystem or the emerging Chinese one? This bifurcation could lead to a splinter net, where data, standards, and services are divided along geopolitical lines, undoing decades of global technological integration. The moves made by Trump and continued by Biden have set in motion a long-term strategic rivalry whose consequences we are only beginning to understand. It is a grave mistake to view the U.S. China trade conflict as a simple two-player game. The decisions made in Washington and Beijing create powerful ripple effects that wash over every corner of the global economy. Consider the impact on emerging markets. Countries like Vietnam, Mexico, and Malaysia have seen a surge in investment as companies look to diversify their supply chains away from China, a strategy often referred to as China Plus One. While this creates opportunities for some, it also brings challenges. These nations must rapidly scale up their infrastructure and workforce to meet the new demand, and they live with the constant uncertainty that a sudden U.S. China truce could reroute that investment just as quickly as it arrived. For America's traditional allies in Europe, the conflict presents a particularly thorny dilemma. The European Union is a trade powerhouse in its own right, and its member states have their own complex relationships with China, which is a vital market for German cars and French luxury goods. They share many of Washington's concerns about China's unfair trade practices and security risks. However, they are often wary of America's confrontational tactics, which they fear could destabilize the global system from which they benefit. The pressure to choose sides between their primary security guarantor, the United States, and a critical economic partner, China, creates deep divisions within the transatlantic alliance. The conflict also profoundly impacts global institutions that were designed to prevent such disputes from spiraling out of control. The World Trade Organization, or WTO, has been a primary casualty. The Trump administration effectively paralyzed the WTO's appellate body, its highest dispute resolution court, by blocking the appointment of new judges. The argument was that the WTO was slow, ineffective, and had failed to rein in China's non-market economic practices. While these criticisms have some merit, the result has been the weakening of the very institution that provides a rules-based alternative to unilateral tariffs and trade wars, pushing the world back toward a system governed by power politics. Ultimately, the most significant ripple effect may be on the global perception of American leadership. For decades, the United States was the primary architect and champion of the liberal international economic order. By taking unilateral actions and prioritizing an America-first approach, the Trump administration signaled a shift away from this role. This has created a vacuum on the world stage. It has led both allies and adversaries to question the reliability of the United States as a steward of the global system. This uncertainty is perhaps the most enduring legacy of the trade war, forcing nations everywhere to hedge their bets and navigate a more fragmented and unpredictable world. We have explored the shocking scale of the trade imbalance, the latest threats of escalation, and the foundational issues of tariffs, deficits, and technology that animate this conflict. We have traced the history from campaign rhetoric to policy action, and analyzed how recent moves are reshaping global supply chains and political alliances. The central takeaway is this: the relationship between the United States and China is the single most important variable in international affairs today. How these two powers manage their differences will define the landscape of the 21st century, determining whether we face an era of managed competition, renewed cooperation, or a dangerous new Cold War. The core issues are not going away. The United States will continue to demand a more level economic playing field, and will remain vigilant about the national security risks posed by China's technological ambitions. China, for its part, will continue to pursue its goal of becoming a global economic and technological leader, and it will resist what it views as American attempts to contain its rise. The fundamental challenge for policymakers in both capitals is to manage this intense competition without allowing it to descend into open conflict. This requires a delicate balance of pressure and dialogue, of deterrence and diplomacy. The stakes could not be higher. On issues ranging from climate change and global health to nuclear non-proliferation, meaningful progress is impossible without some degree of cooperation between Washington and Beijing. A complete breakdown in the relationship would not only risk economic catastrophe but would also paralyze the world's ability to address its most pressing collective challenges. This is why the path forward must be navigated with immense care and strategic foresight. It requires a clear-eyed understanding of the genuine points of conflict, as well as the areas of potential common interest. The world cannot afford for its two most powerful nations to be in a perpetual state of confrontation. This brings us to the final, crucial question. What is the right approach? Is Donald Trump's strategy of aggressive tariffs and high-pressure tactics the best way to force change in Beijing, or does it risk a dangerous and costly escalation? Or is a more measured approach of building alliances and using targeted sanctions, as favored by others, more effective? This is not just a question for presidents and diplomats. It is a subject of vital public debate. I encourage you to share your thoughts and perspectives. What do you believe is the wisest course for America? Continue to follow this story closely, for the choices made in the coming months and years will shape the world your children and grandchildren inherit.